Hello, everyone. Welcome to Diamonds for Peace's third webinar, Voices from the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition. This is one of 4 webinars we are organizing this autumn. I am Maddie Robertson, a volunteer for Diamonds for Peace and today's MC. This webinar will last about 1 hour. The presenter will talk about 40 minutes, then we'll have a question and answer session. If we receive many questions, we will extend our time. Your video and microphones will not be available today. If you encounter any issues during the webinar, please send a message to all panelists using the chat box. If you have a question about the presentation, please enter your question in the Q&A box. If you see a question that you like, you may press the like button. Our presenters will answer the questions with the most likes. Please refrain from recording this webinar. The webinar will be recorded and everyone will receive a link after to watch the recording. When you exit this room, you will see a questionnaire. Please answer the questions so we will be able to deliver a better webinar in the future. I met Chie 2 years ago through my DePaul research advisor, and I've been a volunteer for Diamonds for Peace ever since. To begin our webinar, please welcome Chie Murakami, the founder of Diamonds for Peace, to provide an overview of the organization.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from midnight, Japan. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Chie Murakami, the founder for Diamonds for Peace. We're a small NGO established in 2015 in Yokohama, Japan. And we also have a Liberian branch in Liberia established in 2016. And we are working towards the world in which all the diamonds are mined, cut, and processed with humanitarian and environmental considerations. And our missions are to improve the working conditions and social status of the workers in the diamond supply chain, and to promote ethics and fairness in the diamond industry. So we've got the special consultative status at ECOSOC at the United Nations, and we also are a member of the Civil Society Network for OECD Due Diligence Guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. So we are working in Japan and also in Liberia. So this is the simplified supply chain of diamond jewelry from mine, cut, polish, manufacture, and sell. And our activities focus on the upstream, targeting the miners and diggers for their self-reliance support. And also we are working to raise the awareness of the consumers and the jewelry industry, because we believe the consumers have the biggest power to change the industry. So our goal is to have the responsibly mined diamonds from the cooperatives in Liberia and through traceable supply chains will develop. And their fair share will be redistributed to the mining communities. So that's why we are working in Liberia, and we are working with a cooperative of miners and diggers. So this is a brief overview of our organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chie. Today's presenters are Shimiso Matisi and Hans Merkit. Shimiso is the Global Coordinator for the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition and the Deputy Director for the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association. Shimiso is responsible for program design, fundraising, and functions as head of operations for the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association. As a global coordinator for the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition, Shimiso monitors trade of conflict diamonds around the world. Hans Merkit is a researcher for the International Peace Information Service. Hans is the only non-African member of the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition. Hans coordinates the International Peace Information Service's work within the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition regarding responsible diamond mining and trade. Please welcome Shimiso Matisi and Hans Merkit.
Thank you very much for the introductions. So today what I'm going to do is basically to share human rights violations in the diamond mining sector. And what is key is to just unpack some of the new forms of violence and human rights violations that happen in the sector. So I have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll just share my slide. And after that, after my presentation, then my colleague Hans will then also make the presentation. So I'm going to share my presentation. So firstly, one of the key aspects to take note of is that the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition is an umbrella organization that acts as an observer in the Kimberley process. And we are doing this on behalf of communities. We are doing this on behalf of other civil society groups that are monitoring operations and the trade of diamonds by the diamond industry and also by participants in the Kimberley process. So that means we do that in countries that are producing diamonds, countries that are trading diamonds, and countries that are what we call transit countries in terms of the movement of diamonds from the mining countries to those that receive them, that trade in them, and then those that are into polishing and cutting of diamonds. Most of our coalition members are based in Africa. And the world's main diamond continent, which is basically Africa. So definitely to represent those communities affected by diamond mining and trade. And we seek to improve diamond governance in the different home countries where we're working. And the coalition's local and regional expertise enables us to follow up on responsible diamond sourcing. So that along the supply chain, we do check, we monitor how diamonds impact on the people, on livelihoods, and also on human rights. And the grounded approach that we use in terms of monitoring mining sector is quite important because it's a grassroots perspective. And this brings out national level, local level, regional level, and international related aspects and developments in the diamond mining sector. So we try to bring out what and how diamond mining and trade is affecting local communities. So the coalition includes representatives from Cameroon, Democratic Republic of Congo, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Lesotho, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, and Belgium. Those are the countries that where we have membership. But we are also expanding our membership to include other countries, for example, Central African Republic. We have a new member there, and we are continuing to expand our membership so that we have a good reach. So for now, I will ask Mandy to show a poll that we have gone through just prior to this event. Thank you. So we have a question there that we had sent out. The question is, what kind of diamond-related abuses do you think the Kimberley process seeks to stop? The second one, human rights abuses. The third one, tribal movements. And the fourth one, widespread or systematic violence. And then in terms of what percentage of rough diamonds are conflict-free according to the Kimberley process, 60% is what we have the number. In terms of what percentage of rough diamonds are conflict-free according to the Kimberley process, we have 60%, 75%, is it 85%, is it 99%? And the third one, what should diamond consumers and retailers do according to you? The questions, nothing different. This is not their responsibility. Stop buying diamonds. Only buy diamonds from countries with no reported abuses like Australia and Canada, or ask assurance from jewelers or suppliers about the conditions in which diamonds were mined. So those are important questions on which we can vote. If I can just go to my next slide here. In terms of the ongoing human rights abuses in the diamond mining sector, what the nature of violence has changed. But before I talk more about the nature of violence, let me just go a bit back to the poll results. On what kind of diamond-related abuses do you think the Kimberley process seeks to stop? Those who voted war or armed conflict, 24%. Only 29% human rights abuses. And then those who think it's rebel movements and fighting governments is 47%. So that shows that rebel movements and fighting governments is the popular answer there. And that's in terms of the description, definitely, of conflict diamonds and how the Kimberley process has looked at it. If we go to the next question, what percentage of rough diamonds are conflict-free according to the Kimberley process? The voting results are as follows. We have 60%, those who say 60%, 18%. Those who say it's about 75%, 12%. Those who say 85%, about 18%. And then those who said 99% is about 53%. So these are the percentages according to the voting patterns that we have here in terms of what percentage of rough diamonds are conflict-free according to the Kimberley process. So definitely according to the Kimberley process, they say 99% of diamonds are conflict-free. And this definitely is something that we'll talk about later on. My colleague will address that point. On the third poll question, what should diamond consumers or retailers do according to you? Those who said nothing different, this is not their responsibilities, 0%, no one. Then stop buying diamonds, 0% again. Only buy diamonds from countries with no reported abuses like Australia and Canada, 6%. And then 94% said ask assurance from jewelers, suppliers about the conditions in which diamonds were mined. And I think that's a result is very key, I think, in the discussion we are going to have today in terms of the responsibility of jewelers, suppliers along the diamond supply chain. So having said that, I think let me go back to the presentation in terms of the different ongoing human rights abuses in the diamond mining sector. Like you can see, as you can see from the poll questions there, we asked about the issue of rebel movements, systematic or widespread violence. And the poll shows that most people understand that the Kimberley process itself is aimed at curbing the use of diamonds in fueling armed conflict, aimed at removing legitimate government by rebel movements. And I think that's quite key. That's how, in general terms, conflict diamonds are described. My colleague will go into detail on that element. However, for us, the nature of violence and also the forms of violence have actually changed since 2003, when the Kimberley process was formed. So diamonds are now tainted by new forms of conflict, and also the actions of various types of actors committing human rights. And I think this is quite important when we talk about the new forms of violence. I will describe them shortly, and the new actors who are involved in human rights violations. And these diamonds flow into the global market certified as conflict-free by the Kimberley process. When it comes to the issue of the new forms of violence, one of the key things in terms of the conflicts, is violence. And this violence is often widespread and systematic. And this may include beatings, shootings, killings, and torture of artisanal miners or people who try to access mining concessions. So sometimes they get beaten up, and that also even include villagers who try to mine or go into a particular mining concession without a license or without a permit or without a certificate. So that means those are viewed as people who should be beaten in some sense by law enforcement agents or private security and other actors in the sector, which is not good. So we have had such cases in different countries. As the KP Civil Society Coalition, we did a study and produced a report which shows that these new forms of violence, as I described them, are happening in Tanzania, in Zimbabwe, in Central African Republic, in DRC, and Angola. So it's widespread in diamond producing countries. And I think this is something of concern. So we noted this over the years. So the new form of conflicts that happen. Then you also have cases of sexual violence in some of these countries, including harassment, including rape, including abuse and exploitation of the people and even the resource itself. So this definitely happens in Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Central African Republic. And I think Central African Republic still remains of the proper description of conflict diamonds, because in Central African Republic, we are talking about rebel movements. So it's important for us as we have this kind of discussion to be able to take note of the developments in Central African and outposts in terms of the conflict diamonds as described in the KP core document. Then another form of the changing nature of conflict in the diamond mining sector, the environmental harm and crimes that often happen. We find that most companies start mining disregarding environmental laws, environmental provisions and standards. And that also includes even safety issues to do with provision of personal protective equipment to their, and that exposes them to environmental harm. So for the communities as well, apart from the working environment, we have a situation where companies may contribute to soil, the pollution of water, soil degradation in some cases, air pollution, landscape destruction, and so forth and so on. That's in terms of environmental harm. So you have a situation where some rivers may be polluted, and that leads of livelihoods, loss of livestock for some communities, and also communities not accessing clean and wholesome water. So that affects the right to clean water in situations where countries have that constitutional provisions or have laws that provide for clean water. So that gets affected. So in terms of the actors there, one would talk of private companies or state-owned companies or joint venture companies between private actors and the state. And these are the kind of actors that we have. And we have examples there of Sierra Leone, for example, in Lesotho. We have had cases. I will shortly show some pictures from Lesotho in terms of pollution of water and also the environmental harm that happens there. The same applies to Sierra Leone. Modern day blood diamonds, because we are saying there's new forms of violence and human rights abuses in the sector that are not perpetrated by rebel movements per se. We've had some recent cases in countries where the KP Civil Society Coalition managed to do some fact-finding missions and visits and research. Take, for example, Central African Republic. Like I indicated earlier on, we have rebel movements that are there. Miners. So that means using revenue from the diamonds for purposes of perpetrating human rights violations and also attempt to remove the government. And there's rampant smuggling despite the Kimberley process embargo, because at the moment Central African Republic has certain zones that where diamonds are allowed in terms of trade and export, but that's in terms of a work plan that was developed by the Kimberley process. Then we also have Marange in Zimbabwe, where over the years, company guards and private security have been accused and alleged to have been involved in setting dogs on locals that enter mining concessions. And I think this is important in terms of flagging, because the situation in Zimbabwe led to calls from us as civil society groups that there's need to redefine what we mean by conflict diamonds, because we had cases of human rights violations in the country. So that also even includes situations where locals or villagers would want to access or fetch water or head their livestock, and then they get inside the mining concessions, and then they get beaten up. So those kind of cases were noted in our report. Then in Tanzania as well, in a place called Madui, where we've had excessive use of force by private security as well, the company, with the report of deaths, disappearance, illegal detention, assaults, and life-changing injuries happening. So these are things that are of concern to us. Those are the new forms of conflicts that we are talking about. I'll just show you the following slides, which may include photos, in fact, which include photos that may be cause discomfort to some. If you do not wish to view the audio only. So these photos from different areas and from different countries, showing the new forms of violence that we are talking about. You can see there, we have some images, for example, from 2015. These are historical because we did profiling of the new forms of violence from since when the Kimberley process started. So some of them are old photos, but they show a certain pattern in terms of the new forms of violence. Quite important for us to take note of the deaths there. For example, we have artisanal miners victims of dog attacks in Marange in 2015, then a decomposing body of an artisanal miner in 2017, then some people being beaten up there in Angola for example, from the 2014 to 2016, also victims of violence against artisanal miners in Marange, Zimbabwe. Then locals left with disabilities, allegedly shot by private security guards in Tanzania, 2016 and 2018, respectively. So that shows you a pattern, that shows you a system in which new forms of violence, new forms of human rights violations are happening. And these images are there in our report, which is titled "Real Care is Rare." Other forms of human rights challenges that are key for us to take note of, that are profiled in our report. I think in the diamond mining sector, we have poor labor standards of mining companies, but also manufacturing standards. So this means it happens across the diamond value chain. So you have a situation where poor labor standards are prevalent at mining sites. This happens at medium scale, large scale, or small scale mining companies. And this has been aggravated by COVID-19. One can cite the example of Zimbabwe, for example, where some workers are not happy with the working conditions, low wages, and this does not only affect Zimbabwe. Cutting and polishing centers in India, for example, the working conditions are atrocious in the cutting and polishing industry. So this shows that it cuts across the whole diamond supply chain, the poor labor standards, and this is something that the Kimberley process should be concerned about. Then there are also harms to livelihoods, definitely happening in various forms through restrictions on freedom of movement, in cases where you have a situation where diamond mining concessions are not fenced or are not secured per se, and people or villagers may be moving in the diamond mining concessions. So you have a situation where their freedoms might definitely be restricted unreasonably. So unreasonable measures being implemented by state security or private security. So that affects the different freedoms that may be provided or protected through constitutional provisions as part of the fundamental rights. So restrictions on freedom of movement and sometimes freedoms of assembly for villagers or for communities are something that is of concern in the diamond supply chain. And then ill-managed displacements, because diamond mining naturally comes with the displacement or relocation of local communities in cases where they lose their houses, they lose their land, they also lose their other sources of livelihoods because of displacement. And the displacement often comes with inadequate compensation sometimes. In certain cases, it also comes with inadequate information sharing, lack of consultation or free prior informed consent before someone or before villagers are relocated. And that affects their rights. In some cases, they are just given a week's notice or a few hours to move off their land or from their dwellings. So that definitely violates their rights. And we've profiled this in different countries. For example, Zimbabwe, we've profiled this in Sierra Leone, in Angola, and DRC. So those are the countries where we have observed that and where we have profiled such cases. And then pollution of rivers. I think this is something that I talked about earlier on. Land grabbing is also a major problem. Deviation of water sources, because mining definitely relies on use of a lot of water to wash the ore. So that definitely deviates water from the farmlands, and also access to water for livestock and drinking water. So we've profiled that in Lesotho, in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Sierra Leone. And it also generally leads to poverty with numerous consequences, for example, food insecurity, health-related effects, and also increased tensions, definitely at the local level, the community versus a large mining company. Those kind of conflicts happen in the diamond mining sector. Sometimes school dropouts, and with COVID-19, the situation has been compounded by COVID-19. We've profiled cases of children working to earn something in the diamond mining sector and in other mineral supply chains, for example, in the gold sector. So because of the impact of COVID-19, where schools were closed, and the children would go into those fields and start mining because they are idle, they don't have anything to do at home. So that's an issue in terms of parental guidance, and also in terms of making sure that we don't expose people, or rather children, to the negative impacts of mining. I think just some additional where we are operating as well. Let's say Lesotho, no compensation, just another example for damage to houses due to blastings, human and livestock sickness due to water pollution, and also concerns of tailing dams, the safety of dam tailings, those dams that are run by mining companies to contain effluent from the mining operations. So you find that some companies do not even put in place the dam tailings. They just release raw effluent into river systems. We've had such cases in Zimbabwe. I think around 2013, there was a lot of pollution of 2 rivers in Zimbabwe. So that definitely affects the lives of people. In Sierra Leone, we've had villagers failing to pierce the corporate veil and access to remedy for health and livestock and livelihoods because of the impacts of pollution and plastics. So in Marange, for example, just another example there, workers work for months without salaries during the height of COVID-19. So that further exposes them to poverty, and it affects their lives. Some additional images from Lesotho, for example, there in terms of environmental harm, the damage to houses, water pollution, and also the issue of dam tailings, where communities are affected in terms of their rights of access to water. So we are not just talking about rebel movements, remember. We have to talk about new forms of violence, new forms of conflicts that happen. And I think when it comes to sexual violence, for example, non-state actors are involved. So it might be some individuals or organized groups who may be armed. So non-state armed groups who might be in control of certain trade routes, or who might be in control of certain mining sites, and taxing the miners or the diggers. These are the kind of things that we often encounter in the diamond mining sector. And then you also have a situation where the other actor, now I'm talking about the actors, state security, it might be the police, it might be the military, or other groupings or vigilante groups and things like that. So it's important for us to take note of the fact that the actors or people who perpetrate human rights violations or conflicts have changed. It's no longer about rebel movements only. It's also about non-state armed groups. It's also about the police. It's also about the military. And this is prevalent in most of the diamond mining countries that we have profiled. And you also have a situation where private security companies are involved. and then sometimes just some gangs, and even artisanal miners fighting amongst themselves. So they contribute to human rights violations because if you look at the way fundamental rights sometimes, oftentimes formulated, the perpetrators might just be juristic persons, which may mean even a company itself or an individual. So that means the state might be involved, and company might also be involved, or an individual might be involved in terms of human rights violations. But when it comes to companies, the nature or the classes of rights that they may violate might be different from rights that may be violated maybe by state security. So with respect to companies, you are talking about environmental harm, pollution of rivers, pollution of dams, or environmental degradation. That's a category of rights which companies may violate. You can talk about the issue of poor labor standards or labor rights. They may be violated by a company. And that also includes even harm to livelihoods by large-scale companies or medium-scale companies, or even smaller companies. So state-owned companies have also been named in some of the studies that we have done in terms of human rights violations, as well as manufacturing centers. So it doesn't affect just diamond producing countries, it's also manufacturing centers or the cutting and polishing centers, and artisanal miners as well as small scale miners. Even broadly, one can also start to talk about how diamonds are easily used as a vehicle for money laundering, profiting, criminal and terrorist financing. And I think those are the kind of risks that we have observed in the sector. I may refer you to the FATF report, where Financial Action Task Force report of 2013, for example, which was given to the Kimberley process, and some recommendations there were provided, and the Kimberley process was encouraged to assess the vulnerabilities of the use of diamonds as a vehicle for money laundering and financing terrorists. So that study is very key. You can Google it, and I'm sure you'll be able to look at it. So I'll stop there, and my colleague Hans to continue with the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Shamiso. I'll also share my screen. Hi, everyone. So just give me 1 minute. Here you go. Yeah, so mainly what I want to do in the second part is to look a bit closer at one of the statements I think Shamiso said at the start of his presentation, is that many of these diamonds affected by the abuses Shamiso explained continue to arrive on the market certified conflict-free. And so we want to go a bit back and explain how we came to that situation. I saw from the poll results and from the audience that many of you know this already quite well, the basics of the KP and what it does. We still thought it was important to take some time to go to really the essence of the matter. I'll do it rather quickly for the sake of time as well. And maybe then in the Q&A, we can always dig deeper or expand a bit more on some of the issues I'll scan over. So first of all, I think it's important to understand where the Kimberley process comes from, because that also explains a lot about where it is today. And mainly it is a reaction to a number of reports, first of all, by civil society organizations at the end of the 1990s about links between rebel movements and diamonds. Rebel movements being financing their operations through the mining and trade of diamonds in countries like Angola and Sierra Leone. This was recognized for the case of Angola by the UN in 2000, And that same year, a first meeting was organized between a number of governments, industry, and civil society in the town Kimberley in South Africa. And that led to a range of meetings that became known as the Kimberley process. And already very soon in that process, the idea of a certification scheme for rough diamonds was launched. But eventually these negotiations proved to be quite tough and took a while. So it was in the end in 2003 that the Kimberley process certification scheme was launched. Now, what is the Kimberley process? The basics. First of all, it's important to know it operates under the umbrella of the United Nations, so it reports annually to the UN. It gets its mandate from the UN, but it operates as an autonomous process, so it can take its own decisions on how to implement its mandate and which direction to take with that mandate. The Kimberley process has 55 participants that represent 82 countries, mainly because of the fact that the EU acts as a single participant representing its member states in the process. It's a tripartite arrangement with not only governments, but also industry and civil society acting as observers. This means they participate in all meetings, working groups. They can take the floor in plenary meetings, but when decisions need to be made, this is reserved only for participating countries. So the Kimberley process operates a certification scheme that basically does two things. It says that rough diamonds can only be traded between members, and they need to be accompanied with a government-issued conflict-free certificates. Participation in this process for countries is voluntary, but if members join, they are required to implement a number of minimum requirements in their domestic legislation. Now, let me pick up on two of the elements I just mentioned that maybe require some more detail. Is first of all, how does the Kimberley process define conflict diamonds? That's already been mentioned a number of times by Shamisa, but I think it's important for the discussion to put this clearly. So for the Kimberley process, conflict diamonds mean rough diamonds used by rebel movements or their allies to finance conflict aimed at undermining legitimate governments. I'll let this seep in, although many of you will have seen this before, and I'll come back to that later. And then what are the minimum requirements? You see there how the Kimberley process visualizes that on its website. First of all, it is the requirement to implement minimum requirements in their domestic legislation. So this means they have to set up a legal structure, but also an institutional framework with a KP focal point for every country and importing and exporting authorities. And they also have to implement internal controls. This is also really important because this is a requirement for member states to put in place systems that allow them to trace diamonds from the point where they are mined or where they enter their territory through trade until the point where they are exported, basically to avoid that conflict diamonds would enter the trade. Secondly, it's a commitment to transparency. So countries have to report annually on how they are implementing the Kimberley process. They have to provide statistics on the rough diamond trade. They have to invite regularly or are encouraged to invite regularly review visits. Thirdly, they can only trade with other members that also fulfill these basic requirements. So at present, there's only one country that is considered as not fulfilling this due to the identified presence by the Kimberley process of conflict diamonds, which is the Central African Republic. And finally, so they have to certify shipments in tamper-proof containers with KP certificates. So what are the main accomplishments of the past 20 years of the Kimberley process, but 17 years, let's say, of the certification scheme? Is that it brought large volumes of diamonds into the legal trade that were often in the past not part of this legal trade. And has for a number of producing countries, particularly, definitely in Africa, has also led to important revenues through taxation that have contributed to these countries. Also, so you have, as I mentioned, a basic legislation and governance structure in each country that takes different forms, but the basics are the same. And that also provides a key point of contact for if there are problems. There's a KP focal point for every country that what kind of structures they should have in place, and that is also used for capacity building and technical assistance. This is not something the Kimberley process does directly itself, because the Kimberley process doesn't have a budget of its own. It's basically the sum of its members. But different participating countries have taken initiatives to support such initiatives, such as trainings for government valuators of diamonds or of law enforcement to counter smuggling, or about the formalization of artisanal and small-scale mining and so on. And also the increased statistical reporting on diamond production and trade is important. So you can, on the Kimberley Process website, you can find the basic statistics about each country's volumes and values of the rough trade in diamonds, and the number of KP certificates they have issued. What then are, in our view, a number of functional shortcomings of the KP? You can see there's quite a list. Often reference is made to the conflict diamond definition, but we want to make clear that it's not only about that. There's more in the KP that needs to be addressed to make it a functional process or a functional certification scheme. So firstly, I talked about these internal controls, whereby member states should be able to trace rough diamond trade in their country from the point of entry or mining to the point of export. The KP does not have a clear list of minimum standards for that. It's a list of non-binding recommendation, and this has led to patchwork in internal controls that vary a lot from country to country, and that have significant loopholes that can be through lack of resources of some country, through ill-designed control systems, or also through maybe corrupt officials that deliberately look away. This exists on the one hand in producer countries, particularly often those that already face most problems with issues of conflict or tensions, often countries also with artisanal mining, where by the point where when rough diamonds arrive at the point of export, mainly a big city or the capital, it's often not known anymore from which mine or mining area they came, and it might also be they have crossed one or more borders on their way there, and that brings us to the problem of smuggling. And often, of course, also these countries don't have a big incentive to counter that smuggling, because they can introduce these figures into their own production data and levy taxes on that basis. Also in trading centers, the controls vary, with some countries having stricter control than others. And there are reports of abuses of undocumented stones entering the legal trade through practices of mixing or polishing, to which I come back. Secondly, there's the issue of peer review. This is the way that the KP controls the implementation of its requirements of member states. It works well overall for sharing good practices between members, but the problem is when there are problematic issues to be addressed, that is of course a lot weaker, because the KP doesn't have an independent monitoring system or also actually so basically it's done through recommendations, and then there's no system to follow up on these recommendations or to make sure that actions are taken to address them. Thirdly, the KP is based on consensus decision making. This means that basically any country can veto a decision, and this has over the years shown that it's really difficult to address or to improve the functioning of the Kimberley process. Every 5 years there's a reform cycle. Such a cycle takes 3 years. There's often long negotiations that then in the end lead to very minimal output, because it's so hard to find something on which all the participating countries can agree. There's the issue of lack of transparency. This has improved over the years, so you can indeed find statistics online. You can find the annual reports of countries and observers online. It remains confidentiality. It remains something that a number of member states find really important for the meetings that happen. So we as a civil society coalition are also not allowed to talk about positions taken in those meetings, and that gives a bit an idea of that there would be something to hide there, and that of course alienates the public quite far from what is being decided there. Then there's the issue of mixing. I already mentioned it. It is a practice of how the diamond supply chain works, that often diamonds exchange hands many times because they are sorted based on their 4C, based on the 4 Cs, where diamond actors specialize in certain categories of diamonds, and that means packages are opened and mingled. The Kimberley process is built on that system, so every certificate mentions its origin, but as soon as there's two countries from which diamonds would stem, it mentions mixed origin, which is a very recurring practice in the Kimberley process. And and this is simply how the trade works, but it's also open for abuse by people who want to deliberately obscure the origin of certain stones. A similar issue arrives or exists with cutting and polishing. So we already mentioned the Kimberley process only applies to rough diamonds. So also here there's a weakness or a point that could be abused by actors who want to hide the origin of diamonds by simply polishing them when the Kimberley process no longer applies. Then the conflict diamond definition, we mentioned it, so it only talks about rebel movements financing their operations in the fight against legitimate governments. There's a whole series of abuses that don't fall under this definition, either different kinds of acts related to conflict, such as sexual violence, torture, forced labor, but also of actors, so it doesn't address abuses by government forces, by rebels that are not fighting governments, by private security and so on. One would last as the human rights taboo in the Kimberley process. So we've seen it in one of the polls at the beginning that many of you, or about half I think, thought that the Kimberley process is about addressing human rights abuses. It is not. It is often also, when this is brought to the discussion, this is often referred to by many countries as something that other UN bodies, for instance, should address, and not the Kimberley process, because it is about conflict diamonds and conflict prevention, not human rights. In our view, this is not. This should not be like that. I think many people have the expectation of a certificate of the Kimberley process that it provides a kind of guarantee of a responsibly sourced diamond, and that is not one that is subject of human rights abuses. And finally, there's basically only one tool that the Kimberley process has at its disposal, and those are nationwide embargoes. So if it identifies the existence of conflict diamonds somewhere, it can impose an embargo on a country, as it has done with the Central African Republic in 2015. And then later exceptions were made that it could export from a number of compliance zones. But the problem with these embargoes is that they're very indiscriminate measures that often punish many of those whose livelihoods depend on diamond mining, and often allow criminal actors or illegal actors to thrive, because they are the ones specialized in smuggling, in illicit financing, in money laundering. So with these embargoes do not allow to target mining companies or mining areas that are abusive, but always directly a whole country. It's also what we try to visualize a bit here with this scheme, that you have this one aspect that the Kimberley process addresses, but a whole spectrum of other issues, be it the negative impacts of diamonds or positive impacts of diamonds, on which the Kimberley process does not work directly. So basically, with the Civil Society Coalition of the Kimberley process, we want to make the argument that the work is not over. The problems that exist with diamonds are not necessarily exceptional. They exist in supply chains of many products, other minerals, but other goods as well. But what is exceptional for diamonds is the denial of these problems out of fear of tainting an image-sensitive industry. You often see reference to the fact that 99.8% of diamonds are now conflict-free. This is, you see that here is a screenshot taken from the Kimberley process website, but you find it in many, in a lot of communications by the diamond industry. And that is, of course, not true, or only by the very limited conflict diamond definition of the KP, but that nuance is often not added to such statements. And the problem is that statements like these keep the KP blind to its own inefficacies, and it takes away any incentive for reform, because if we are talking about 0.2%, well, where is the urgency? So in our view, we need to talk still about diamonds. We need to openly look at where the problems still lie and how we can address this. And this is not an easy task, so there's no easy solutions. In our view, we need to go for progressive improvement. This is also language from the OECD due diligence guidance, where it is clear that infringements or certain conditions that are not in order yet shouldn't lead to embargoes, but should be addressed and improved step by step. And for us, a first step is to face the facts, and that might be a very modest one, but it's something that is not that it does not exist through the sector already. And that is why we think as consumers, as citizens, as jewelers, we need to ask these difficult questions about where diamonds come from and what guarantees can be offered. And even though the replies may be disappointing because there are not that many cases where you can really get a good assurance that you have not contributed to any of these problems. Even though we are talking about a minority of diamonds, of course, but still it's important to address this minority. And only in that way can we build the pressure in order to address this. In our view, the Kimberley process may still have a role to play, but if it doesn't reform, that role is very limited. It is about addressing the situation, for instance, right now in the Central African Republic, but none of the other cases mentioned at present. And that is also why we need initiatives to address the whole area of challenges that are not being addressed by the KP. And there are traceability initiatives using blockchain. There are responsible sourcing pilots in certain countries linking artisanal mines to the market. There are good practices of industry self-regulation. In our view, these are all important. All of them face shortcomings, but what is missing is really an industry-wide discussion on how to take the best from all this, how to honestly lay bare where the problems still are and scale the best practices in order to address them. So this is basically what we wanted to, the point we wanted to make today. And I thank you for your attention, and I think we will still have some time for questions.
Thank you, Shimiso and Hans, for a wonderful presentation. I would like to invite everyone to go to the Q&A box. If you have a question for either Shimiso or Hans, you are welcome to put your question in there. We have a few questions to start. Shimiso, I believe the first question is for you. Clara asks, are the issues you're mentioning mainly due with artisanal mining or large-scale mining as well?
Thank you. The issues I talked about in terms of the new forms of conflict, they apply to both, some of them apply to large-scale or industrial mining entities, while at least others apply to artisanal mining. So maybe I can just give some clearer picture of how this happened. Sometimes you have a situation where a large-scale company has 400 workers at a particular mine site, and there are poor labor standards there. This is happening at a large-scale mining company, and that company is not paying adequate and fair salaries to its employees. Human rights violations at that particular company, or if the company is not providing adequate personal and protective equipment to its employees. So that means poor labor standards and violation of labor rights are happening at large-scale mining company. Another example, you might have a situation where a large-scale company might be polluting river systems. And I think this happened in Marange. Company is called Anjin, was polluting river systems. It's a large company. It happens at large companies. That's in terms of environmental degradation and pollution of rivers. It happens at large-scale companies. And then you can also have a situation where the companies themselves might be complicit with state-owned with state security. Complicit, they might commit human rights violations, for example, the beating up of people, or a company might engage private security, which private security then commits human rights violations or might beat up people. So that means that the company, the large-scale company, is complicit in human rights violations. I think there are a lot of legal cases that that can be referred to when it comes to complicit between private security and large-scale companies. Because in most cases, it's the large-scale companies that engage and contract private security. So these kinds of violations happen at that level. And then when it comes to artisanal mining, I think I've given examples of situations where in certain artisanal mining communities, you might have armed gangs or criminals taking advantage of the situation, controlling certain trade routes, and then taxing or getting some fee from artisanal miners. And in that process, suppressing the people, or even beating up other people, or even shooting at other people. And that also includes situations where artisanal miners themselves can fight amongst themselves because of maybe someone might have found a stone here, and then when it comes to sharing of that stone or the proceeds of that stone, it becomes a conflict. So there are different levels of conflict that happen in the artisanal mining sector and in the large-scale mining sector.
Thank you very much, Shimiso. The second question is also for you. Joyce asks, could you please elaborate on the meaning of setting dogs by company guards on locals that enter into the concession related to the modern day blood diamond?
So what normally happens is you normally have a situation where if there's a private company, they give dogs to a guard or a private guard for purposes. These are trained dogs. So once they see a villager or an artisanal miner who is trying to enter that concession, the security guard would release that dog, and then it starts to bite that individual who is trying to enter a mining location. So you have a situation where some people might be bitten by dogs, starving, bitten maybe in their legs or all over the body, and that kind of that kind of situation. So those are things that often happen in the diamond mining sector. I think there has been a lot of examples from Zimbabwe where some security guards would set dogs on artisanal miners or people who try to enter a mine site. Those are the kind of abuses that we are talking about.
Thank you, Shimiso. Sean asks, given that consumers purchase cut and polished diamonds on which the entire industry ultimately relies, why has the KPCSC not spoken out about the trade in blood diamonds, not conflict diamonds, that fund the rogue regimes guilty of grave human rights violations downstream of the mining sector? Maybe this question can be for Hans.
I can address this question. Well, I don't think, of course, today, if the question is about today, why have we not spoken about it? I think we explained that we presented cases of where we were able to do fact-finding ourselves, so in countries where the KP Civil Society Coalition is active, and that is, as Shimiso explained, basically mainly in African countries and in Belgium. I think we speak towards the Kimberley process meetings. We bring all cases where we find documentation we can bring to meetings. So for instance, you have the working group on monitoring in the Kimberley process. So if we hear of people send us documentation about abuses, we bring it to those meetings to be discussed there with the participants, with the industry representatives. So that's basically how we operate. It is true. It's due to a fact of limited resources and limited network. We are always open to expanding, but we of course have the best facts of the countries in which we are active, and we have to think, of course, about our credibility as well. And and make sure that we bring cases of which we are sure that we have that can be documented. So that's typically how we operate. Shami, so I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, just to add on to what Hans has said, just emphasizing the point. I think for us as the KP Civil Society Coalition, we want evidence. We want irrefutable evidence. We don't want to act on hearsay or flimsy connections. Or things that may not be backed by facts. It's always important in the work that we do. That's why, as Hans indicated, we have membership in different countries, and those members of ours gather information from the communities, from the people who are affected, and we triangulate the information, and this is the information that we act on. So because also we have limited resources, as Hans had already indicated, we may not be able to cover each and every other country. But we are ready to receive information from any person, any individual, or any groups. And I think we've always invited those with information to provide us with that information.
Thank you, Hans and Shamiso. We have a question, I believe, for Hans. Kindly elaborate on the weak peer review examples of what the reviews lack or do not address.
Yeah, indeed. I went a bit quick maybe on that point, but in essence, it's about the limitations of a peer review system, of course, per se. There have been recently in the reform cycle, there have been the Kimberley process decided to make a number of improvements to peer review. So perhaps the future will show to what extent certain shortcomings will be addressed. But the main issue is what lacks is independent oversight. The peer review system is, of course, a review by peers and is therefore not independent. I can maybe give an example of how the Kimberley process organizes its review visits. So normally every country is encouraged to invite a review visit to its country every 3 years. It's an encouragement. It's also nothing that the KP can enforce. There is, as I said, the Kimberley process does not have a budget. So participation in these review visits basically depends on which countries are willing to fund the travel costs of their members that go on such a review visit. The same goes for civil society and industry. But already there it depends quite much on the capacities of the individuals on that team. Typically it's 5 to 6 people who are then asked to write reports. That the timeliness of those reports also varies. Sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it takes a lot longer before the report is finally out there. And then in those reports are a number of recommendations, and then these recommendations are there somewhere in a report, but there's no active follow-up of anything that is in those reports. So then when after a number of years there's another review visit, the process starts all over again. So these are basically some of the weaknesses why such a mechanism doesn't really push members towards better compliance with requirements. As we mentioned, the internal controls is something where there's a lot of problems in many members, KP members where that have not, and that will always be a recommendation in a report, but it often stays a recommendation, and that is something that is a weakness of the system, of course.
Thank you, Hans. Danielle asks, are there any international further steps being done to expand the assurance scope of natural diamonds besides the Kimberley process? If so, by whom? I believe this would be a question for either of you.
Yeah, maybe I can start, and Shamiso can add if you have any other thoughts. I'm not sure whether I fully understand the question, but I think it's indeed about what is being done also outside the KP to deal with these issues, and there are various initiatives. The industry is setting up various systems of self-regulation, where they are asking assurances from their suppliers of diamonds, or you have systems by De Beers, by Signet, you have the Responsible Jewelry Council. So there's a lot of requirements for industry to participate in a certain supply chain. often our view is there that the limits are still that it's a lot about documents, supplying documents. And if you have supplied all the documents, which is about policies you should have in place and issues, then it's fine. And there are audits, but there's also audits on documents. So there's not really audits of really conditions on the ground of supply chains, also because these supply chains for diamonds are, of course, really complex. But when there are human rights abuse, for instance, identified, it's always NGOs, for instance, who bring them. It's never an audit that reveals something like that, which shows that of course, there's limitations with what these can do. And then what I also mentioned is that there's a number of responsible sourcing pilots to connect artisanal diamonds to the market, such as Gemfair in Sierra Leone, such as My Fair Diamond from the Antwerp diamond sector, and a number of others. These are pilot projects, I think, in a way. So these are currently still small scale, but these are working to bring diamonds that have fulfilled certain conditions of responsible sourcing to the market. So there's definitely things happening. We think there hasn't been sufficient industry-wide discussion on how we can take the best of all that is happening to address the remaining sore spots in the sector.
Yeah, maybe just to add on to what Hans has said. You might be aware that from the industry side, the world's biggest diamond mining companies have converged and formed the Natural Diamond Council. So as an international alliance of those leading brands when it comes to diamonds, to promote ethical and sustainable operations or transparent business practices, as that grouping calls it. So I think what their mission, I'm not speaking on their behalf, but just from following discussions in their circles, is basically to protect and promote the integrity and reputation of diamonds. And I'm sure from that set of objectives and goals or principles that the grouping is looking at, it's trying to promote responsible sourcing. But I think for us, if you look at the companies that we are talking about, you're talking about Alrosa, you're talking about De Beers, Dominion, Lucara Diamonds, Petra Diamonds, Rio Tinto, and Rio Zim. Those are the big seven companies. So as the big players, I'm sure that the challenge for them, personally, what I would challenge them to do is to find ways of working with the smaller ones or the medium companies or the smaller companies down the ladder of the diamond supply chain in terms of mining. Because once the diamond itself is tainted, the natural diamond itself is tainted, it affects the whole supply chain. It affects every other company. So I think it is important for that grouping to make sure that they find ways and systems of taking along the other players in the diamond sector in terms of adopting responsible sourcing measures, in terms of making sure that they also respect human rights, environmental standards, and ethical standards in the diamond supply chain. So it should not just end with the Natural Diamond Council, but they should demonstrate or pilot certain programs that can benefit the whole diamond sector. So that's one key recommendation I would just put across when it comes to such initiatives.
Thank you very much. Clara has a great question to end our question and answer session. She asks, is the Kimberley process actually listening to what you have to say? Why don't we start with Shani? So thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I think what we have in the Kimberley process is a situation where agreements with civil society positions are issue based. So what do I mean? It depends with the issue that is on the table or that is being discussed. In the majority of cases, we haven't had traction within the Kimberley process with some members of the Kimberley process. Certain governments do not agree with our position when it comes to issue of expanding the definition of conflict diamonds. So there's disagreement there, definitely. We have proposed, we have adopted and also forwarded a lot of proposals on the definition, steps that can be taken, who can we call the actors, and what kind of actions can we say are key to focus on as new forms of conflict. But most of those have been rejected. It's because of the decision making process within the Kimberley process, which does not allow for traction and for easy convergence of views. But we have had a situation where we have agreed with certain participants as well. We have co-sponsored certain positions, for example, with the Canadians. We also supported their proposal to jointly propose the issue of definition in the Kimberley process. We've also collaborated with other observers in the Kimberley process, for example, WDC or the World Diamond Council. And so there are those kind of situations where we might agree. And then in terms of agreement as well, there are certain times when the Kimberley process would also welcome and agree to proposals by civil society. For example, the need to include communities and civil society when it comes to improving the peer review system. We made some proposals there and they were accepted, although there was a lot of contention in terms of how do we put it across. We've also presented some other proposals in other working groups that have also helped the Kimberley process to move forward. But in the majority of cases, we find ourselves being in the minority in terms of agreement with our positions. But I'm sure, Hans, you can also elaborate further on this question.
Yeah, maybe I just wanted to add that in a way, we, as a civil society coalition, we have to make a constant balancing exercise between, on the one hand, playing our role as a civil society watchdog there, and on the other hand, avoiding that we legitimize a system that we find at least partly or even more than that broken. And there are civil society organizations, international ones, big ones that have already left the civil society coalition for that reason. So the past 3 years were a big reform cycle of the Kimberley process, and then we decided before that reform cycle to stay and play an active role in the process, and we came with a lot of proposals, and we invested a lot of energy in that, and in the end the result was really disappointing, which is why we also decided at the beginning of this year when we had our strategy meeting that we remain, but that we cannot play such an active role in negotiations anymore, but really want to stick to the role of a watchdog to watch the process. But it's also why we want to address more audiences like here to talk also outside the KP crowd, because we feel that there's more needed than what can be done there, and then there's more. As we are not often listened to, we need to find new listeners who do want to hear our story and maybe help us raise the pressure.
Thank you very much to everyone who posed such wonderful questions. Also, thank you to Hans and Shamiso for very thoughtful answers. We will turn it over now to Chie, who will make a few announcements.
Hans and Shamiso, thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. Let me just make a quick announcement. We are currently running a Sourced with Love campaign. We want to celebrate the people who has jewelries with diamonds with known origins and conflict-free. So if you have any of that kind of diamonds, please post your story with hashtag Sourced with Love on Instagram, or you can share the story through our website on the URL here. And you can also support Diamonds for Peace as a supporter, as an individual, if you like, starting with $5 a month. So if you are interested, please visit our website. You can also be a corporate member to support Diamonds for Peace initiatives in Liberia. So if you are interested, please also visit our website through this URL. And we are recruiting volunteers. We have currently about 50 volunteers in Japan and also in other countries like the States. And the areas of volunteering varies from proofreading, writing post articles, and organizing events, webinars, and designing, etc. So if you are interested, please visit our website and sign up. Okay. And we are also seeking the opportunity to speak at the events or at the schools, because we believe knowing the issue is the first step to help solve the issue. So if you have any opportunities for us, please email to us to info@diamondsforpeace.org. Thank you, Madi.
Please join us for our next webinar on emerging technology for transparent supply chains. It will be held on Friday, November 13th. We will have Carrie George from Everledger speaking with us. You can find the free registration at Eventbrite. Diamonds for Peace is working towards the world in which diamonds are mined, cut, and processed with humanitarian and environmental considerations. We would appreciate if you could support us in any way. There are many opportunities for, as Chie said, different kinds of volunteering, such as what I am doing, and other ways to get involved. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you to Hans, thank you to Shimiso and Chie. We appreciate your time.